Bill for that wonderful presentation. As I said before, I'm handing out these source sheets. It's not necessary, it's just an aid. So if it's the Hebrews overwhelming you, then you can get down to work on the translation for each paragraph later. But I'm going to go along. This is going to be using as my guide as we go through the sources. I think my 8th grade science teacher would have a lot of nachas seeing me stand here and just listen to another 20 minutes or so of the stuff that I didn't pay enough attention to when I was in his class, and I hope we'll be able to do this together. Okay, I'd like to start off by really thanking Rabbi Yosef Bloom for encouraging me many months ago to spend time on this topic. He came over to me and said, "You can do a share in the Eclipse, it's coming up." And I said, "Eclipse? Not for me." But he encouraged me and convinced me that it's something that we should spend time on. And really the first thing I want to discuss, for those who are following along in the sources, is why is it important for us to understand the calculation of the orbits. It's very nice and interesting. I have to turn this off. It's very nice and interesting to get a little review of what we might have learned many years ago, but why from a Torah perspective is it important for us to understand the various calculations of the orbits. So this really goes back to a Gemara in Shabbos on Daf Ayin Hey, where I'm going to read the Gemara and explain. The Gemara there says, Amr Reb Shimon ben Pazi, Amr Reb Shua Balevi. Reb Shimon ben Pazi says, in the name of Reb Shua Balevi, in the name of Bar Kapara, Kol Hayadea Lachshav B'Tekufay Sumazolis. Whoever knows how to make the calculations of the various seasons and the constellations, V'Ein Choshev, and doesn't do it, he's lazy about using his knowledge. Allah HaKasav Omer, about him, the verse says, Vespoil Hashem lo yabitu. The verse in Yeshaya says that the works of Hashem, he doesn't regard them. Umaisi yodav lo ro, doesn't want to look at what Hashem's beautiful creations is. So the first thing the Gemara is telling us, if a person has the knowledge but just ignores it and doesn't use it to figure things out, how HaKadosh Baruch Hu is running the world, so he's in violation of this idea of recognizing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is guiding the world on an ongoing basis. The Gemara continues and says, Amr Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amr Rav Yochanan, Minayin, from where do we know? Shemitzvah la'adam, it's incumbent upon a person, lachshov t'kufos u'mazals, to be able to make these calculations. The first opinion of the Gemara said, if you have the knowledge, you should use it. But now, how do we know that we should get this knowledge? So the Gemara says, it's incumbent upon a person, Shnei, as the verse says, U'shemartem v'asisem, we should guard the mitzvahs and keep them, Ki chachmaschem u'binaschem le'enei amim. It's our wisdom and our intelligence to share with the nations of the world. Now this pasuk is not particularly talking about the orbits, it's talking about mitzvahs in general. But the Gemara is wondering, why is it that if we share our knowledge of mitzvahs to the nations of the world, that'll be a reason for them to acknowledge our wisdom. So the Gemara explains, the pasuk is not talking about all mitzvahs, it's particularly talking about, the Gemara concludes, Ezu chachmo bina, what is a wisdom and intellect, shehila enei amim, which we could share with the nations of the world. Havi omer, this is chishuk tekufos u'mazolos, making the calculation of the various seasons and the constellations. Keeping in mind that in times when the Beis HaMikdash was standing and the Sanhedrin was in full force, the Chachmei Yisrael were the ones that were visually watching the orbits and understanding how things were working, because we needed to know when Rosh Chodesh is going to be. So they always had to know exactly when the new moon is going to be. Now, we'll get to a little bit later, we'll discuss how our calendar kind of just all works on, it's just set in motion. We don't do this anymore nowadays, because at the end of the second Beis HaMikdash, Hill already set it up that our calendar just works in a 19-year cycle. We'll get more to that later. But in the times of the Sanhedrin, it was imperative for Chazal to be one up on understanding all the celestial bodies and their movements and their orbits, the elliptical, and whatever, as Bill spoke about before, because this is something that we were empowered with to declare when Rosh Chodesh is. We'll declare when the Yom Tovim is. The Gemara emphasizes that. We say when the Yom Tovim is, it's irrelevant necessarily. Bezdin declares Pesach is going to be the 15th day of Nisan. Well, who decides Rosh Chodesh Nisan? It's not like the days of the week, which are set always in motion. It's up to Bezdin to determine when the new moon is, and they have ways of calculating that based on people coming in and giving testimony, what exactly they saw, etc. Those long Gemaras about that in Rosh Hashanah, but it was up to the Sanhedrin to determine that. So we have to do, although we might not be on the Sanhedrin, but it's incumbent upon us to be familiar with it, and as the Gemara says, it'll bring us to greater awareness of Hashem. So this was a question posed to the Rambam, and this is in source 2. Maimonides, in his response, was asked by a group of Jews who wrote him a letter and wanted to know, is this really a mitzvah? Is it not a mitzvah? We don't find it on the list of 613 commandments that there's a positive commandment that we should all become scientists. So what does this Gemara mean? So the Rambam says, like we've already spoken out, it's underlined in the second source, he says, that what you asked me, and what's the benefit of knowing all this information? He quotes a Brisa in the name of Rameir, and now in our standard editions of the Talmud, we don't have this Brisa, but the Rambam had it, and the Gemara there that he quotes says, Histakel b'maisa, we should look at the creations of the world, Shamitoich kach, because of this, Atamakir esmisha amar v'haya ha'olam, we'll come to recognize and be aware of who created the world. So we'll come to a better recognition of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that'll bring us, the Rambam discusses as well in the Sefer Mishnah Torah, Yad HaChazaka, that this brings us to Ahavas Hashem, to love Hashem, and appreciate everything that He did for us. And similarly, in the third source, there it's quoting from the commentator Ian Yaakov, which is in the standard edition of the Ein Yaakov on the Gemara, where he says, although the Gemara says Tekufos u'mazolos, the Gemara says we should know how to calculate the seasons and the constellations, but it refers to all the ideas of the orbits, and he says specifically, so we should know when the eclipses are going to happen. He references the idea that in many ancient cultures, an eclipse was a cause for fright and panic, and people would think the end of the world is coming, particularly when there's a solar eclipse. And I researched this based on the Maharal has a tremendous amount of svarim, and in the newer editions put out by Rabbi Hartman, so he tells you on the footnote, look in Encyclopedia Britannica to understand how the nations of the world used to respond to eclipses. So once I had a heter to look at Encyclopedia from the Maharal footnote, so I did that, I did my due diligence, and I read up a little bit about many of the ancient cultures really believed that this was the end of the world. They would all of a sudden, they accurately know how to predict it. Many of the cultures, some did, the Egyptians and the Babylonians didn't know how to predict it properly, but many of them did not, and they were really going to fright whenever there was a solar eclipse. And so here, the Ein Yaakov explained, this Gemara is particularly important that we have to understand when this is happening, so we don't get into this pandemonium that the nations of the world might spread to us, and to recognize that it's all part of the Bria, as we'll continue to go on. So the first thing I want to basically emphasize is the importance and appreciation for everyone coming out today, because we're performing a mitzvah, not just learning Torah, but this is a particular mitzvah of appreciating and understanding how HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the solar system. Now, the second part I want to discuss on page 2 of the sources is the question many people have asked me over the past few weeks: do we recite a bracha on an eclipse or not? So we're familiar that many of the natural phenomena that occur on a regular basis, lightning, thunder, or God forbid earthquakes, shooting stars, other things that happen, there are special brachos that we recite. We recognize Hashem's power and awesomeness in the world. What about an eclipse? Do we say anything about it or not? So I quoted 2 sources which I found discuss it. One is from the journal called Techumin. It's a rabbinical journal published a couple times a year from Israel. I thank the Israel Library for having that available for me to use. And there was an article in the 24th journal that they published a couple of years ago where he quotes the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe in the Igros HaKodesh, that the Rebbe was asked, is a bracha recited or not? And the Rebbe said, no, we do not make a bracha, we do not recite a blessing on anything which is not mentioned in the Talmud, in the Gemara, as reciting a blessing for. We'll get to later, the Gemara does discuss eclipses, but the Gemara never says you shall make a blessing on the eclipse. The Gemara discusses, again, the lightning and the shooting stars and other things, but the Gemara says do not make a blessing on the eclipse. If the Gemara doesn't say we do it, therefore we don't invent new things to make brachas for. He says, he suggests perhaps a reason for this is because, again, as we'll speak out a little later, there is a particular bad omen associated with an eclipse. So perhaps he suggested the reason why we won't do it is because of the bad omen it might signify. But bottom line, he said no blessing. Similarly, in the Sefer Mesoras Moshe, which is the notes of the diary of Rav Mordechai Tendler Shlita, a grandson of Rav Moshe Feinstein, so he wrote down, he journaled many of the things he spoke to his grandfather about, and this is, I think, probably written sometime in the 70s, where he wrote down, he asked his grandfather, Rav Moshe Feinstein, there's going to be a lunar eclipse, it was during Sukkot sometime, and he asked him, should we recite a blessing or not? And Rav Moshe Feinstein responded the same as we said, that there is no blessing for it. And Rav Moshe told him because it's a siman ra. It has a bad omens attached to it, and that's why we do not make a bracha. In the footnote of the Mesoras Moshe, which is the editor, put it in, he says, he references to this idea as also the Vilna Gaon, although not discussing eclipses, but he's discussing in general the concept of not making a bracha on things which on items which have a bad omen associated to them. So he says that's another precedent that, although again the Vilna Gaon was not talking about the eclipse, he's just talking about in general other things that have a siman ra attached to them, but do not make a blessing. So from both sides of the camp, from the Hasidic camp and from the non-Hasidic camp, it seems like the general consensus is there is no blessing to recite. For those who are able to stick around to the end, I will offer those some ideas of what we could do, God willing, at the eclipse. So the third thing now I need to cover, as time is moving along, is what are they referencing to? These great Chachamim who are referencing that there's a siman ra, there's something, a bad omen looming with the eclipse. So what is that referring to? So there's a Gemara in source number 6 here on the second page, a Gemara in Sukkah, a lengthy Gemara. I'm going to highlight just some of the points. And the Gemara there brings three opinions. The first thing the Gemara says is Tana Rabbanan, Bisman Shachama Loke, when the sun is stricken. Literally that's what it means, when the sun is afflicted. So it's a siman ra l'kol olam kula. It's a bad sign, it's a bad omen for the whole world. That's the first opinion of the Gemara. The second opinion of the Gemara says Tanya, it's Torah name of Rav Meir, Kol Zman. As at any time that any celestial body, the Ma'oros, any celestial body is stricken, it's a siman ra l'soneim shel Yisrael. It's a euphemism. It literally means the enemies of Israel, but it's a euphemism for it's a siman ra for Klal Yisrael, because Klal Yisrael, the Gemara says, is melumid b'makos. We are accustomed to being punished by Kadosh Baruch Hu or set straight by Kadosh Baruch Hu. So anytime there's a bad omen happening, we have to take it personally as a sign for us. So again, the first opinion was when the sun is stricken, it's a siman ra l'kol olam kulai. The second opinion was anytime any celestial body is afflicted, it's a siman ra, it's a bad omen for Jews particularly. The last opinion of the Gemara, a couple lines down, for those who are following along inside, it says, Tana Rabbanan, the Gemara says, Bizman, at the time, that the Chama is local, when there's a solar affliction, we'll call it for now, I'm not using the word eclipse yet for a reason, when there's a solar problem, something's going wrong with the sun, that's a siman ra, the Ovdei Kachavim, for the nations of the world. It's a bad omen for them. Whenever there's a Levana Loka, whenever there's a lunar eclipse, it's a siman ra l'soneim shel Yisrael. It's a siman ra for, again, a euphemism referring to us. It's a siman ra for the Jews. And the Gemara explains why is that, because since the Jews use their calendar, it's a lunar-based calendar, so anything which happens to the moon is, we take it personally, and since the nations of the world use a solar calendar, so anything which happens to the sun corresponds to them. So again, we have three opinions in the Gemara. How do we paskin, so to speak? It's not clear. This is not a halakhic discussion. So the Gemara, all three possibilities are viable, the three viable possibilities in the Gemara. And the Gemara concludes, though, later on, where I underlined it further down, and the Gemara says, however, wherever the Jews are properly fulfilling the will of the Almighty, Ein misyarin mikol egel. We have nothing to fear, because the pasuk in Yirmiyah says, Ko amar Hashem, so says Hashem, El derech hagoyim al talamdu. Don't learn from the ways of the nations of the world. Umei osos hashemayim al techasu, and do not be afraid from the various signs appearing in the heaven. Ki yichatu hagoyim hemos. And Yirmiyah already is telling us in the Navi that the goyim are afraid when they see things happening in the skies. Of the kechavim yichatu, the Gentiles, the nations of the world, have what to be afraid of. Ein Yisrael yichatu. So if Klal Yisrael is on the proper madrega, if we are doing what we got to do, then we don't have to be worried about the various celestial signs. The Gemara then says, another fascinating idea, that there are four reasons why the sun is stricken. And I'll just mention the four things the Gemara says, but I'm not going to really harp on any one of them right now. The four things the Gemara says is that if there's an Av Bezdin, someone who leads a rabbinical court, a great rabbinical leader, who passes away and is not eulogized properly, that's one reason why the sun is stricken. The second thing the Gemara says, if there's a Nara Murasa, a young engaged girl who is violated, and she screams out for someone to save her, and no one comes to save her, that's the reason why the sun is stricken. The third thing the Gemara says, Mishkav Zachar, on homosexual relations, that's the reason why the sun is stricken. And the fourth thing the Gemara says, if there are two brothers who get murdered and no one's there to help them, that's also a reason why the sun is stricken. Now, the explanation of these four things is a entirely different topic. I'm not going to go there right now, what these four things have to do with the sun and the moon, but I'm going to point out now, as we'll get back to shortly, the Gemara says there are reasons why the sun is getting stricken. So now, let's go discuss for a moment, what does this mean? The Gemara said that the Chama is loke, or the moon is loke. It gets hit, it gets afflicted. Now, we could just translate that as an eclipse. The challenge with that is that many of the commentators ask this question. An eclipse is a natural phenomenon. We have scientific explanations, or not besides explanations, we have scientific data telling us how many eclipses happened the past couple thousand years, how many will happen, and when the next ones will happen, exactly where the path of totality will be. That's all very scientifically arranged and organized. So why is the Gemara telling us that it represents this, or it became because of this, or it has all these symbolisms to it? It's just it's not random that it happened. We know exactly August 21st at a certain time the eclipse is going to start. It will end at a certain date, or end at a certain hour of the day. It's only visible in a certain location, so it's very clear cut. So what's the Gemara referring to? So one answer given, which is in source number 7 on page number 3 of Rabbi Yonas and Eclipse, he says this Gemara has nothing to do with eclipses. It has to do with, there are certain things, I don't know the scientific information about it, but I'll just say what he says. He says there are certain things called sunspots, or certain other things that affect the sun, and they're not necessarily, first of all, they're not necessarily visible to the naked eye, number one, and number two, they're not necessarily going to affect, we're not really even going to realize things are happening, but he says those people who are in the know when these things are happening, and that's what the Gemara refers to when it's referring to all these bad omens happening. So it has nothing to do with our eclipse, solar or lunar, nothing to do with that. And so according to Rabbi Yonas and Eclipse and others who follow this approach, that this whole Gemara is not relevant to this year. Okay. The Maharal has many discussions about this Gemara. I highlighted one for now. The Maharal also takes this whole Gemara to a wholly different explanation. In source number 8, Maharal learns this Gemara has nothing to do with the sun and the moon, has to do with Talmidei Chachamim and people that are less learned, and the whole Gemara is allegorical, referring to when Talmidei Chacham get stricken with certain things, or other people get stricken with certain things, and that's in source 8 to go through, totally nothing to do with natural sciences, nothing to do with anything that we could witness in the skies above. Okay, I'm just going to keep moving so we'll end up at the appropriate time. So again, according to Rabbi Yonas and Eclipse, the Yaris Devash, in source number 7, this phenomenon the Gemara is discussing has nothing to do with eclipses. It has to do with some other, something else that might happen on the sun or the moon. According to the Maharal, in one shot, this also has nothing to do with eclipses or anything with the sun and moon in a physical sense at all. It's completely allegorical and completely discussing different people's behavior and how that will affect different things in the world. Okay, but thanks to other sources, we can have a share to talk about it. Many commentators learn that this Gemara is referring to eclipses. And therefore, they start again with the basic question. They say that Tzi'irim, the young ones, laugh at this Gemara and say, what are Chazal talking about? What are our Chachamim telling us that an eclipse happens and it represents a bad omen and it happens because of the following 4 things like we said before? It's all scientific. So the Ben Yehoyada in source number 9, the Ben Ish Chai of Yosef Chaim of Baghdad, he says, veneerally, he says, the Vadai Hu B'Teva. Of course, this is part of nature, this is part of science. Ach Bizman Sheyiyeh Lakos, at a time when there will be an eclipse, Yisoru HaMekatrigim Lekatre. So I'll just translate those words. The accusers now have the ability to accuse. So it's kind of, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created in the Bria this system that however often the eclipse will happen, go through all that scientific data, anytime that happens, says the Ben Ish Chai in his comments on the Gemara here, Sefer Ben Yehoyada, that it just is an opportunity for those angels that are out to prosecute us, out to get us. They have a pischon peh. They have the ability now, to open their mouth and say claims against the Jewish people or claims against the nations of the world, whichever opinion of the Gemara you're going in. So again, according to the Ben Yehoyada, now we're getting this a little more personal, that the eclipse time is something to be a little bit frightened of, because it's a Siman Ra. It's now giving, again, the Mekatrikim, the prosecutors in heaven, an opportunity to stand up and say any claims they might have against us as a Jewish nation or the nations of the world. And in a similar vein, in source number 10 on page 4, the Iyun Yaakov says this as well. On the bottom of the Ein Yaakov, Belibi Omerli, he says, my heart tells me that, of course, we understand this from a scientific perspective, that it's all going to have a natural course, but it's a certain time of a bad, Mazloi, its omen time is bad. He says, he quotes a Gemara, which some of us might be familiar with. The Gemara goes through, depending on what constellation a person is born under, represents what his tendency will be. One of the most famous ones, if a person is born under Mazel Madim, under Mars, the Gemara says he'll have a bloody tendency. That could either mean that God forbid he can become a murderer, or he might become a shochet or a moa, right? So we were born under a certain tendency, but it's up to us as an individual to channel that appropriately. So in a similar vein, Ein Yaakov says that this is a time, like the Ben Yehoyada says, of a bad siman, a bad omen, But it's not, it doesn't have to be if we, like the Gemara says, if we act appropriately and we're doing the Ratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so we can channel it to, in our favor. The Aruch LaNer in source 11 also learns about this, with this train of thought, that it's a time that the Makatrik and the prosecutors have an ability to prosecute us, and he has a very interesting deal in exacting in the wording of the Gemara. If you turn back for a second to the Gemara in source number 6 on page 2, he says, if you look carefully, all three opinions, the first one, it said, Bizman, at the time that the Cham is loken. Or Ameir said, the Zman that the Ma'oros are loken. Or the last opinion was, Bizman Shacham loken, at the time. That word Bizman is superfluous. The Gemara could have just said, Kisha Hacham loken, or Kisha Ha'oros loken. When the sun is stricken, or when the sun is eclipsed, or when the other celestial bodies are eclipsed. The extra word Zman, says Aruch LaNer, that's the key of the whole Gemara. The Chazal, of course, knew, they weren't oblivious to the understanding of the scientific way that the solar system is working, but they were pointing out, at the time it's happening, this kitrug, this prosecution is possible, and we have to act appropriately. So he reads it very well into the Gemara, that it's an opportunity, again, like we said, for the malachim who are out to get us, for them to speak. And Chazal, we're hinting to that when they said, Bisman, at the time it's happening, this is what's going up in Shemayim. But not, like he says, the Mal'igim, those who wanted to scorn and scoff at the Gemara and make fun that the Gemara Chazal didn't understand what was happening. He says, Chas v'shalom, and they wrote it precisely in this way to tell us, not whenever it happens, look in your local almanac to figure out when it's going to happen. But recognize that when it's happening, this is what's going upstairs in heaven. So to sum up, from that Gemara in Sukkah, there are those like Rabbi Yisrael Eibshitz and those who went in his mahalach and his understanding, the Gemara say the Gemara has nothing to do with our eclipse. It has to do only with other things that could happen at more random times that are not scientifically on a track. And that's what the Gemara is referring to. The Maharal, in one of his Pshatim, said that it's not referring to anything to do in the solar system at all. And the consensus of many of the other commentators was that it has to do with our phenomenon, with our eclipse. And it's just what the idea of the Chazal telling us is that there's something going up above, that we wouldn't be privy to that information if not for Chazal telling us. We would just think it's something cool happening. But the Gemara is telling us it might be cool, but realize that it's a time of din and simin ra, according to each opinion of the Gemara, at the time of the eclipse. So that's from a hashkafic view. The fourth thing I wanted to discuss is what is the possible halachic significance of the eclipse? Again, it's very interesting, it's very cool, it might now also, according to many commentators, represent a certain simin ra, a bad omen happening, but in halacha, bottom line, what does that have to do with me? How's it going to change the halachic daily life? So just a little background before we get to this. We know our calendar is lunar based. We go with the lunar months. But we have to adjust, and Chazal built this in for us, that we have to adjust to the solar calendar as well. And they set up a 19-year calendar system. We're not going to get into all that right now. But that's the idea, and it continues, repeats itself. They set it up from, again, towards the end of the second Beis HaMikdash. And that calendar has been going perfectly since then. We're the only calendar system that I'm aware of that never has been adjusted over the course of the approximately past 2,000 or so years. As we know, the civil calendar, in the 1500s had to be considerably altered. That's how we got the Gregorian calendar, the Julian calendar. Okay, that's for a different class. We spoke about that once when we discussed why December 4th and December 5th are the dates for when we start saying the same Talmud to Levracha. Okay, but our calendar is perfect in a way that it continues to work. It doesn't need to be adjusted. But here's the big but. Chazal sacrificed accuracy for simplicity, meaning there's a tremendous amount of calculation that needs to be made to make the calendar. And they could have been perfectly accurate, and it would have been overwhelmingly difficult for us. So Chazal gave us certain averages and certain numbers to work with, although they said it's just an average, and that's how we work. So on average, a lunar month is 29 days, 12 hours, 44 minutes, and 1 chelek. A chelek is 3 1/3 seconds. That was a measurement Chazal used for a discussion on itself why they used it. But the average of a lunar cycle, now scientifically, really the moon only takes 27 and something days to cycle, and then another 2 days approximately to balance out because the sun is also moving. So in order to properly align with everything else, it's even scientifically it's 29 days and change the average. But When Chazal told us, they gave us this average. Now Chazal were aware that sometimes it's less than this average. Again, the average is, let's just say for argument's sake, we'll call 29 and a half days. We'll leave off the change for now. 29 and a half days is the average, and Chazal were aware that sometimes the molid, the new moon, will happen before that, at 29 and a third days, or sometimes it'll happen a little bit past 29 and a half point. But nonetheless, Chazal said, we don't want to get bogged down with the details of that accuracy, and for simplicity's sake, we're always going to work with the average. So now, just some cool facts for those who are paying attention when we bench Rosh Chodesh once a month in Shul. So the Gabbai always announces before we bench Rosh Chodesh the Molid, the new moon. Right? And he'll say the Molid, that's Zion in Yiddish or Hebrew or English, whatever language he's announcing it in, the Molid will be Monday morning at this and this time. And they always say, and something chalakim, right? 1 chelik, 2 chelik. If you notice, every month, it goes ahead 1 chelik. So I don't have the luach in front of me now, but for argument's sake, let's say this past month we're in Tammuz. Let's say when they announced the month of Tammuz, for argument's sake, let's say they announced the Molid at 12 o'clock and 27 minutes and 1 chelik, for argument's sake. So the next month, that Molid is going to be announced 29 days later, 12 hours, 44 minutes, and 1 chelik. So you're going to notice that every month there's 1 chelik being added. So until we get to 18, we don't announce 18 chalakim because 18 chalakim, for those who are following the math, is going to be 1 minute. 3 1/3, okay, do the math equals. So we only announce 0 chalakim till 17. And then we go back to 0 chalakim again, to 1 chelik, etc. It's just an interesting thing to notice next time the Gabbai makes the announcement that, oh, I realize that we're a chelik ahead of where we were last month. Okay, but fine. The average month is, again, let's say for simplicity's sake, 29 and a half days. Now, that is what we call the mola, the new moon. When the new moon appears, we can't see it yet. The Gemara, this is a fascinating Gemara, Rosh Hashanah, and Machlokes Rishonim how to understand the Gemara. How many hours after the new moon starts could we actually see it? Some say 6 hours, 12 hours. The general consensus nowadays is we can't see anything before 12 hours after the new moon is born. So, at the time of the eclipse, that's the real moiled, because everything, really like Bill was saying before, every month, technically, if everything was perfectly circular, we would see an eclipse every month. The reason why we don't see it is because everything's three-dimensional, working all their funny orbits, and I'm not going to go ahead and do that whole dance again, but that's why we don't always see the eclipse. It only happens at certain times. But when everything is lined up on some level, the sun, the moon, and the earth, that's the mole, that's the new moon. So at the solar eclipse, that's going to be the new moon. That's now the Molid. Now, for those who are keeping track, Monday, August 21st is Erev Rosh Chodesh El. Now, it's always going to be, go back to all your research backwards and forwards, any solar eclipse is always going to be either Erev Rosh Chodesh or Rosh Chodesh itself. Again, it's a little calculating to figure out why it might even be on Rosh Chodesh if it's the Molid, but trust me for now, it's always going to happen that the solar eclipse is going to happen either Erev Rosh Chodesh or Rosh Chodesh itself. A lunar eclipse, which we're not going to spend so much time on the Jewish calendar is always going to happen in the middle of the month. So it's going to be Yudal, Tezvav, or Tezzayin. Okay, that's the way it's going to work out. For scientific minds who figured out how the lunar eclipse works, you understand why it has to only be when the moon is full. Okay, so now, on the secular calendar, it's randomized dates when these solar and lunar eclipses happen. On the Jewish calendar, it has to work in that order. So now, the men who are familiar here, we say Kiddush Levana every month. Now, there's a question, there's a machlokus, until when we're allowed to say Kiddush Levana? Kiddush Levana is a machlokus if we can start saying it 3 days after the Molid or 7 days after the Molid when the new moon started. The custom is to wait until the first Motzei Shabbos after 3 or 7 days after the Molid. And then until when could you say it? So this is a machlokes in the poskim, but we paskin that you can say it till halfway of the month. So, you do the math. Rosh Chodesh was Monday, the next Rosh Chodesh is going to be 29, 30 days later, let's say, right? So halfway point, Tezvav, last point you can say Kiddush Levana. Now that is not perfectly accurate because really it's halfway between each Molid. Now sometimes the Molid might be the day before Rosh Chodesh or the day after Rosh Chodesh. I'm not going to get into why that might happen, but that's how it could be. So you have to look in the Luach. Most shuls have an Ezra's Torah Luach or other calendar, which tells you what the last day you can say Kiddush Levana is on. Now, let's say you walk outside and it's the last technical night to say Kiddush Levana, so you're somewhere around Tezvav, 15th day of the month approximately. And as you're about to say Kiddush Levana, the calendar said you can say Kiddush Levana until 12:30 tonight. And you're standing outside, it's 8:30 at night, and you see a lunar eclipse. Right? You weren't paying attention to the news, you didn't realize it was supposed to happen. Now the question is, could you still say Kiddush Levana or not? The Luach said you could say Kiddush Levana until 12:30 that night. but you just saw a lunar eclipse. Like we just said, what does a lunar eclipse symbolize? The lunar eclipse represents exactly the halfway point. So the Beis Yosef, which is the source 12 over here, quotes a tshuva from the Maharil, one of the earliest Achronim, 1500s approximately, who says that if you see a lunar eclipse, you cannot say Kiddush Levana anymore. Although Chazal set up for us an average of when the Moled of the past month and when the Moled of the next month is, and we usually just pick the midpoint and say that's when you can say Kiddush Levana until. But if you have a lunar eclipse, game over. And let's say you have a solar eclipse. So now we're going to announce the solar eclipse, like we said, is going to be Erev Rosh Chodesh Elul. So the Shabbos before that, it's going to be August 19th, right? The Gabbai is going to announce when the Moled is going to be. I don't have the calendar here, I don't know exactly when he's going to announce it. But if you're paying attention, you'll notice that the Moled, when he announces, is not going to be the same time as the solar eclipse. So we just said the solar eclipse is the real Moled. So fine, we announce the average Moled, right? So we're not going to be so exact. But now that we have this, we're all going to, some level we'll experience it, or we'll know about it, or we'll go see it, whatever it's going to be. So maybe we should have to now recalculate our cheshbonos, our calculations for when Rosh Chodesh is, or when we can say Kiddush Levana until. And that is what the poskim here are discussing in source 12 and 13, that we're not going to consider that to recalculate our cheshbonos because, for different reasons. Some of the commentators explain because since the path of totality of the eclipse is relatively small, so we're not going to take into consideration the solar eclipse at all for our calculations. However, for a lunar eclipse, Beis Yosef seemed to conclude that if a lunar eclipse happens in that month, we should not say Kiddush Levana anymore for that month, even though according to Luach, there might still be another couple hours or another day to say it. How do we paskin regarding this question? So of course it's going to end up in a machlekes. The Mishnah Berurah doesn't decide on this issue, and neither does actually the Shulchan Aruch or the Ramah themselves, even though in their Beis Yosef, in the pretext of the Shulchan Aruch, he discussed it. The actual Shulchan Aruch doesn't discuss it. However, the Levush, one of the primary disciples of the Ramah, who was also an expert in astronomy, he published a whole sefer on it. He does paskin that if there's a lunar eclipse, that'll be the stop point for Kiddush Levana. The Kaf HaChaim, for those who are of a Sephardi descent, the Kaf HaChaim paskins this as well. In source number 15, there's a lunar eclipse, that'll be the shuttle point for Kiddush Levana for that point. However, none of the Poskim are saying that we have to really be concerned halachically for the solar eclipse, meaning it's not going to change our calculation of the Moled because, number one, it doesn't cover a wide area, so not many people will be exposed to it in a large sense. For example, just to paint an illustration for a minute. The next lunar eclipse, when I did a quick Google search, will be in about a year and a half or so. It's going to be a lunar eclipse, I think in 2019. It's going to be in the middle of the month of Shvat, on Tu B'Shvat, right? Like you said, it has to be in the middle of the month, the lunar eclipse. And it's going to have the totality of the whole North and South America. That's quite large. So the whole North and South America, sometime in the middle of the night, will be completely dark, in the middle of the month. As opposed to this upcoming solar eclipse, right? So it's going to have a 70 mile or between 70 or something mile width span. It's going to cover part of the United States. Millions of people might see it, but millions of people are not going to see it. It doesn't have the same, coverage and widespread, viewing as a lunar eclipse has. Therefore, halachically, we're not going to take that into consideration. Okay, for the sake of time, we'll move on and drop more, but there is interesting something for those who have the sources. You can look at number 16, and that's from Reb Chaim Kanievsky Shlita. He discussed this question as well in regards to Kiddush Levana. So bottom line, part number 5 now is what should our reaction be from a Torah perspective? How should we react to the eclipse? So there's a sefer called the Sefer Hasidim from the Rishonim, written by Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, and as its name connotes, it's about acts we can do in a pious way. And this Sefer Chassidim is often quoted by many of the commentators, but many of the things he says is not quoted by the poskim. But this idea is quoted, and the Sefer Chassidim writes as follows. The wording here I think is important. If a person witnesses various celestial bodies being afflicted, like we said before, being eclipsed, Kigon, for example, a person sees Levana, a lunar eclipse, Sarach lehis anos, he should fast. Why? He says, Shaharei b'shvil chaloim, there's a halacha called a tainis chaloim. A person who has a very terrible nightmare or a very bad experience at night, there's a halacha of, at times, the totally low-orthodox rabbi, when it's appropriate, to have a self-proclaimed fast. So he says, if we had this idea that for a bad dream, a person should have a fast, if something is a bad omen for the whole world, all the more so we should do some type of repentance and fast. And he brings a raya from the Nevi'im. Anytime they saw also calamities beholding the nation or the world, they would self-impose a fast upon themselves. So Sefer Hasidim, and this is quoted by the Magen Avram, seems to be suggesting that when there's an eclipse, for example, a lunar eclipse, we should fast. Now, if you look at the Magen Avram, when he quotes the Sefer Hasidim, he doesn't quote it the way exactly Sefer Hasidim writes it. He says, when there's a lunar eclipse, you should fast. So it left me questioning, was the Magen Avram understand the Sefer Hasidim as only meaning a lunar eclipse? But I think if you look carefully at the words, he said, if you see any eclipse happening, for example, a lunar eclipse. I don't know if that example is limiting his previous statement, or he's just saying, for example, and not limiting what he just said in regards to the previous statement. Now, I have not seen in any of the contemporary halachic works, to the best of my quick research, I haven't seen everything, but from when I looked quickly, I didn't see that many of the Mefarshim quote this lahalacha, so I'm not advocating that we should fast. But the message is, like we said before, the idea this is going to be happening on Erev Rosh Chodesh. There's a halacha the Mishmur brings down in Siman Tov Yud Zayin from the Mekubalim. For those who are into Kabbalah, Kabbalah is not just about cool things, it's about self-improvement. So the Mekubalim say, every Erev Rosh Chodesh, it's what we call Yom Kippur Katan. It's a minor Yom Kippur. There's reasons for why this is, but we're not going to get into that right now. So I think this will be a very opportune time for those who are able to. There's slichas to be said. In this shul, we'll be saying slichas on Monday, August 21st by Mincha. It's an appropriate time for self-introspection. And like I think we started off by saying, Rosh Chodesh, particularly by this idea of being aware of how HaKadosh Baruch Hu arranges the world, is always an ideal time for us to be aware of the need and the potential for a renewal in our spiritual deeds, especially it's Erev Rosh Chodesh El. We could do tshuva then and avoid the Rosh Hashanah rush. Let's get into the right mode. If a person feels overwhelmed by the awesomeness of the eclipse, which might very well be, we can channel that to say certain kapitel of Tehillim. What came to my mind was two particular chapters. There's chapter 19, which talks about Hashemayim Misapim Kavod Kel, how the heavens recount the wonder and glory of Hashem's creation, or this kapitel, chapter 104 of Baruch Nafshi, which goes through all the thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu for all the beautiful creations that He has us. So we have ways, from a Torah perspective, to channel our thanks and recognition of HaKadosh Baruch Hu running the world. But I think this will be a great opportunity for us to properly prepare for Elul and recognize that whatever Siman Ra might represent, whether it's for us particularly, or for the nations of the world, or for all of us, we should use it as a time for spiritual growth and awareness. I thank you all for coming, and I'm happy to stick around for questions if anybody has any more questions.